I've been getting really interested in astrology and how the planets have a physiological and emotional impact on our lives. This is a science. I went years and years of my life not believing any of this, not thinking that the planets actually have a direct impact on our physiology and on our emotional and mental states. I don't know what it's to do with, honestly. I haven't gone that deep into it. But currently, Mercury is in retrograde, and that will sometimes send people of a worrying mindset into panic, because when Mercury goes into retrograde, and of course don't use this as like an excuse, we don't always have to blame Mercury being in retrograde on all of our bad things in life, but when it goes into retrograde, which just means, apparently from what I read, that as we see Mercury past Earth, for a moment it looks like it's moving backwards, but it isn't. It's just because of the way that the sun, just because of the way of our orbits crossing through the sun, it just goes backwards for a moment to our vision, although it actually doesn't. Again, don't blast me if I'm wrong, but this is just from what I'm reading. I'm just getting a little bit passionate about this. I love reading it because it's very interesting, because this week I noticed 5 things erupt in my life in a way that they haven't for a while. And I know that right now Mercury is in retrograde. And then I started Googling and doing a bit of research and finding out what the hell this Mercury retrograde thing is. And by Jove, some of these things that I'm going to share to you are so on point, they're so perfect, that I just want to dive into it. So if you're interested in this and you're interested in astrology, then by all means, stick around. So as you might have noticed, I've been away for about a week travelling. And one of the first issues that we find as we have a look at what Mercury in retrograde affects, it's travel. Again, like I say, sometimes to people that don't know anything about this just sounds bonkers. And of course to me it would have done probably a couple of years ago. But now I'm getting so in tune and so interested in it, because it's like it's showing up real things in my life, but it's all becoming so clear for me that this is deeply, deeply connected to the cycle of the planets. When Mercury is in retrograde, it is said that we tend to have travel issues. Remember, Mercury, I believe, was the god of travel in Greek times, the god of travel, the god of communication. We're going to get onto communication in a minute because it's so key. But we have had, and you've seen it in the news, Heathrow and Gatwick, 2 of the UK's large airports based in London, have had complete outages. People didn't fly. And I know from my experience, because I've just got back from travelling, that my flight was cancelled. So I started thinking, oh god, this is weird. It's one thing you don't expect to happen, is it? And I'm pretty good at responding to situations positively, because after a while it's all you have is a positive response, because you know that negativity isn't going to serve you in any way, shape or form. Don't worry, we got onto our travel when we ended up getting to our destination, but we had to go by taxi, and it was long-winded and a bit painful, but our travel was disrupted. So this was the first thing that I started researching, and I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. And this is what happens when Mercury goes into retrograde in astrology, is that we tend to have travel issues. 2, power outages, technology issues, power cuts. When I was in my destination, on my travels this week, we had a power cut. And of course, these things just seem wildly unconnected. But then if you go and have a look and read into what how Mercury being in retrograde affects these power systems in our cities, it's absolutely nuts, because it goes beyond like belief. You don't have to believe it to be true when it's actually happening to you. And of course we could just say it's all just accident, but of course if you're on this channel, you know that there's no such thing as accidents, no such thing as coincidences. It's always divinely planned. Some people might call us gullible, some people might call us naive, but too much goes on and it's so clear it's at a certain time, especially for me this past week, that this is so true. I've had power cuts, not only in the destination that I was travelling to, but power cuts here in my house. Just constant, for no reason whatsoever. We never get them unless, and now looking back at it, unless Mercury seems to be in retrograde. Of course, I don't ask you to believe me, never believe anything I say, but if you start noticing these things in your life, it's likely because they're true, you know. 3, one that you might notice in yourself, really, because this is how the planets tend to affect us physiologically and mentally and emotionally as well. Bad habits come to the surface. Now we can blame Mercury being in retrograde for our bad habits. We can say, oh, here we go, let's just lie in bed for a month, and because it goes for about 3 weeks, doesn't it, Mercury in retrograde. Lie in bed for a week and just don't start anything new. Just, you know, just lay there and wait for Mercury to to go back into its normal cycle around the sun. And whilst I get that, we can blame Mercury for the reasons why our bad habits are coming up, but because it will bring bad habits up in us. But we can also see it from the positive perspective of like, oh right, well here's an opportunity for me to have a look at where life might be asking me to grow. If a bad habit comes up in our consciousness, for example, that little teaser thought or that mental image comes up and we get dragged into it, believe it to be true, and then go out and then play out that bad habit, we've lost all of our power, haven't we? But if we see it as an opportunity, let's call these little flashcards our bad habits popping up when Mercury's in retrograde, we can use Mercury being in retrograde as an opportunity to notice where we're not quite stable yet in life. And I've noticed loads of bad habits trying to pop up into my consciousness, especially this past week while I've been travelling. And of course, we can go with them. There's no judgment with going with those bad habits. We can do that. We're free, right? You're allowed to play out your tendencies if you like. But it's also a time when Mercury is in retrograde is a time to assess these bad habits and see if they're actually really still serving you or whether they're kind of holding you back. And I have to admit, I've looked at 3 specific habits in my life right now that are very much holding me back from my highest intention, from my highest purpose. 4. When Mercury is in retrograde, I think somebody put it nicely in one of the astrology books, one of the astrology research papers that I was looking at, and it said almost like you get, when Mercury is in retrograde, it's almost like it's planned perfectly. Not financial difficulties, but unexpected payments perhaps, or little knockbacks financially that you weren't quite expecting. And this is something that's so interesting for me because it's like, especially having a business of my own, and it's quite a scary time, isn't it, when Mercury's in retrograde, because it brings up all of these financial fears inside of us. It's like, oh, is my abundance going to run out, or am I, you know, obviously with my business things are going the right way and have great momentum behind them, but we always have these fears, these illogical fears, that all of that's just going to drop away, you know. But it's good to hold ground and notice again that I'd go back to point 3 perhaps in me and say that's just another bad habit, to believe in lack, you know. There is one astrologer wrote in one of these readings that I read, one of these publishings, he or she said, when Mercury is in retrograde, this is a perfect time to never start anything new, like business-wise. And it just made me chuckle because my feeling is, you know, of course you can start it whenever you like, but around these times these fears of lack do come up. And of course, if we know anything about the law of attraction, a lack mentality is going to draw more lack into your life rather than abundance. So I feel, and this is something that I'm practicing currently as we go through Mercury being in retrograde, is to practice abundance, to constantly tell myself that I'm abundant, to constantly look around and see, remind myself of my abundance, looking deeper into things perhaps, finding abundance where you wouldn't normally see it perhaps, if we can think of it that way. 5. Emotional volatility. I don't know, I'm sure the astrologers know, but I don't know how the spin of the planets and their gravitational pull around the Earth affects us emotionally so much, but it seems to. Always when Mercury goes into retrograde, everyone from the spiritual community just is like, oh, screw it. Let's put my, what's it called? like carbon fibre bulletproof vest on. Let me put my bulletproof vest on, sit in my room, hide for a year. Because it seems like at these times our emotions, especially the negative ones, are highlighted for some reason. I don't know how, but I've just noticed it in me. Alright, fair enough. Actually, this time around, in this Mercury retrograde, my emotions have been pretty even keel. However, I've seen externally with friends emotional volatility. And this week it kicked off big star while I was travelling. And I'm sat there thinking, I've done all of this work inside of myself, and yet emotion, because we say, you do the good work inside and then the external world will change. And I'm like, well, I've done all of this work inside of myself. I realised I'm not the body, etc., etc. I'm pretty happy in my life, but externally I'm still witnessing volatility with some friends. It was a difficult situation, and it comes down to communication. There was a lack of communication, again, which links to Mercury retrograde. It's always good to see things from other people's sides, because communication is so key, isn't it? When we get into tiffs or fights, of course I don't really get into many anymore, but when we see it externally, it's good to, if we can, being spiritual people, not take sides. I found that this week, and communicate really what you feel and what you mean. There's ways of communicating, isn't there? And it seems to me, from the way that life played out in front of me this week, that when Mercury is in retrograde, people have a tough time communicating well. They get their point, they have their point, but it's almost like sometimes their point is right and everybody else is wrong. And that can be difficult when two people come at loggerheads with that, and they almost need somebody in the neutral ground to, I made this joke to the people that were arguing, but to have like the proverbial fire extinguisher, just to be that person that just puts out all of the fires that these two are stoking up. But it comes down to communication, doesn't it? And it comes down to Mercury being in retrograde, which it has been for like 3 weeks. But fear not. All of this stuff will end shortly, because on the 2nd of August, Mercury will no longer be in retrograde, and we'll all be happy bunnies. Again, it's not like we have to blame the bad things on Mercury being in retrograde, because all it takes is a perspective shift to see that actually it can be quite a positive time for us to reevaluate, what's going on in our lives, to really retune our lives almost, if bad habits are still playing out in you. And it's something that I've been looking at this week for sure. Okay, down below, should you wish, there's a free guided meditation. It's not really a guided meditation, although it kind of is, but it's more of a breathing practice. It will stoke up a feeling of oxygenation in your body, it will energise you, it will relax your nervous system so that you're ready to enjoy the feeling of your prana inside your body. And down below there's a community for awakening souls. It's free. If you're going through an awakening process and you don't have anybody to talk to, you don't have any confidants, shall we say, it can be difficult if you don't have that emotional support. So we're here for you. It's down below, it's totally free, and that's on Facebook. It's totally private as well. That'll do. Thank God for Mercury being in retrograde for only 2 more days. Keep slugging it out. And if you are noticing these things, let me know down below. Tell me what you're going through, because I'm super interested to know whether I'm the only one. Alright, thank you very much, and have a lovely day.